Caleb Brooks built the most successful farm in the valley with his own 2 hands, and then he nearly destroyed all of it for a woman who never loved him at all. This is the story of how a hardworking man lost everything to a beautiful lie and how he found his way back. It's a story about temptation, about the difference between someone who dazzles you and someone who truly stays, and about second chances. By the end, you'll understand the most important lesson a hardworking heart can learn the hard way. If you've ever worked hard for something and watched a single bad choice put it all at risk, this story is for you. Tap subscribe before we begin for everyone who learned that the things worth having are built slowly and lost quickly. Now let me take you to a valley farm and the man who had everything until he met her. Caleb Brooks was 28 years old, and he was the hardest working man anyone in the valley had ever known. He had inherited a small, struggling patch of land from his father, little more than a tired barn and a few rocky fields. But where others saw a hopeless plot of dirt, Caleb saw a future, and he was willing to bleed for it. For 10 long years, he worked from before dawn until well after dark. He cleared the rocks by hand. He rebuilt the barn board by board. He learned everything there was to know about the soil, the seasons, the markets. He made mistakes, and he learned from every one. Season by season, year by year, the farm grew. The fields turned green and gold. The barn filled. The herd multiplied. By the time he was 28, Caleb Brooks had built the most respected, most successful farm in the entire valley. He had everything a man could want, except someone to share it with. And in that one small emptiness, trouble would find its way in. It was a bright summer day at the county market when Caleb first saw her. Vanessa wasn't like the women of the valley. She was polished, glamorous, dressed in clothes that didn't belong anywhere near a field of dirt. She was passing through the area, she said, on her way to somewhere more exciting, and she looked at Caleb like he was the most interesting thing she'd seen in years. For a hard-working man who had spent 10 years alone, the attention was intoxicating. She laughed at his jokes. She admired his strong hands. She told him he was wasted out here, that a man like him deserved so much more than dirt and cattle. Caleb was smitten. He had never met anyone like her, and he mistook the thrill of it for love. What he couldn't see, what he didn't want to see, was the way her eyes lingered not on him, but on everything he owned. His neighbors saw it. His old friend Hannah, who ran the farm down the road, saw it most clearly of all. "Just be careful, Caleb," Hannah told him gently one evening. "Make sure she loves the man, not the land." But Caleb just laughed it off. He was too dazzled to listen, and that was his first mistake. It began small, the way these things always do. Vanessa didn't like the early mornings, the smell of the barn, the dirt under his nails. So Caleb started skipping the dawn work to sleep in with her. She wanted to go out, to be entertained, to spend. So he started spending on dinners, on jewelry, on trips to the city she loved. The money he had saved for new equipment for the farm's future began to drain away. The chores he had never once neglected in 10 years began to pile up. Fences went unmended. Fields went untended. His farm hands grew worried. His animals grew thin. The farm he had bled for began slowly to wither. And every time Caleb felt a flicker of doubt, Vanessa was there to wave it away. "Why work yourself to death over this place?" she'd say. "Take the money. We could live somewhere exciting. You're worth more than a pile of dirt, Caleb." And slowly, the unthinkable began to seem reasonable. Caleb started to believe that the farm, the thing he had built his whole life around, was holding him back. By the end of that year, the farm was in trouble, real trouble. The savings were gone. The harvest, neglected all season, came in thin and poor, and for the first time in a decade, Caleb couldn't pay his bills. Vanessa had an answer, of course. "Sell the farm," she pressed, "pay off the debts, and let's leave this place behind for good." Exhausted, confused, and desperate to make her happy, Caleb actually agreed. He called a buyer. He put his father's farm up for sale. The night before the sale was to close, Caleb sat alone on his porch, and for the first time in months, the fog in his head began to clear. He looked out at the land his father had given him, the barn he had rebuilt with his own hands, the fields he had bled into, and something deep inside him screamed that this was wrong. And then the truth arrived, not from his own heart, but from a careless moment he was never meant to see. Through the open window, he heard Vanessa on the phone, laughing with a friend. And what she said turned his blood to ice. "Almost done," she laughed. "He's selling the farm any day now. Once the money's split, I'm gone. Honestly, who'd want to actually live out here?" It was never about him. It was always about the payout. In that single moment, the spell shattered. Everything his neighbors had seen, everything Hannah had tried to warn him about, everything he'd refused to believe, it was all true. She had never loved him. She had loved his land, his money, the payout she could squeeze from a decade of his sweat. The next morning, Caleb called off the sale, and then he faced Vanessa. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply told her he knew the truth, and that she needed to leave. Vanessa didn't even pretend to be hurt. The mask simply dropped. She gathered her things, called a car, and left without looking back, exactly the way she'd always planned to. And as her car disappeared down the lane, Caleb felt the strangest thing, not heartbreak, but relief and a deep, burning shame at how close he'd come to losing everything. He looked out at his neglected, struggling farm, and he made a vow. He would never let anything pull him away from what truly mattered again. The next morning, before the sun was even up, Caleb was back in the fields where he belonged. It was not easy. The farm had fallen far in a single year, and there was a mountain of work and debt to climb. But Caleb threw himself into it with everything he had, the way he had as a young man. Only now he was wiser. He mended the fences. He nursed the animals back to health. He worked the tired soil until slowly the green began to return, and he wasn't entirely alone. The community he had nearly ignored quietly came back to him. And one neighbor came more than any other. Hannah, the friend who had warned him, who had never once said, "I told you so." She rolled up her sleeves and worked beside him in the dirt, day after day, asking for nothing in return. And as the seasons turned and the farm slowly came back to life, Caleb began to see what had been right in front of him all along. Hannah was everything Vanessa was not. She didn't care about his money or his land. She cared about the work, the soil, the simple, honest life, and about him. Where Vanessa had pulled him away from everything that mattered, Hannah stood right beside it all with him. She didn't flatter him with empty words. She challenged him, laughed with him, and showed up every single day. It was nothing like the dizzying thrill he'd felt with Vanessa. It was something quieter and deeper, and 1,000 times more real. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun go down over the recovering farm, Caleb finally understood the difference. Vanessa had wanted what he had. Hannah wanted who he was. One had nearly destroyed him. The other had quietly helped him rebuild. And this time, Caleb didn't mistake the quiet for anything less than what it was. The real thing. 2 years later, the farm wasn't just recovered. It was thriving more than it ever had before. Caleb and Hannah ran it together now, side by side, a true partnership built on hard work and honest love. The fields were green and gold again, the barn was full, the animals were healthy, and the farmhouse was no longer lonely. Caleb often thought about how close he had come to losing it all and what it had taught him. He had learned that the things worth having take years to build, and only a moment of weakness to lose. He had learned the difference between someone who dazzles you and someone who truly stays. And he had learned that the loudest, most glamorous love is often the emptiest, and the quiet, steady kind is the one that lasts. Caleb Brooks had built the perfect farm, lost his way, and very nearly thrown it all away for a beautiful illusion. But in losing his way, he found something he might never have found otherwise, the wisdom to know real worth when he saw it. The hardest worker in the valley learned the one lesson hard work alone could never teach him, that what you build means nothing without the right person to share it. Sometimes you have to almost lose everything to finally understand what everything is truly worth. Caleb never set out to learn his lesson the hard way, but he came back stronger, wiser, and finally, truly home. And the farm he almost lost became the place where, at last, he found everything that mattered.